Can you climb Celeste Mountain without climbing? I can't believe the ghosts and ghouls and spikes that are placed all over for some reason, but the fact that she can climb a whole mountain with zero experience is too far. It's probably the only thing I agree with Battling on. So I'm gonna try and never climb. To do this, I use the in-game no grabbing mode, so even if my brain does glitch out, it's impossible for me to cheat. There's some more advanced rules I go into later, but for now that serves our purpose well. The tutorial is up first, and it's all going well until we get here. The walls are a little too high to jump up, so we're gonna have to use our first trick, neutral jumping. Normally when you jump off a wall, you're holding the joystick and it causes you to go flying in the opposite direction. But if you don't hold the joystick, you only go out a little bit. And if you then press the joystick back, you can get back to the wall and gain some height. While it's not the end-all be-all and is much more annoying and situational than climbing, it is still the most useful and important trick in this entire run. I flew through the rest of this level and entered level 1, where I continued soaring all the way to this room. You're supposed to grab onto this platform and ride it to the exit, but I can't do that, and simply jumping and dashing is certain death. So I'm gonna have to use another advanced trick known as the wave dash. If you jump, dive at the ground, and then jump again, you get a ton of momentum, which leads to really cool platforming and cool skips in earlier levels. In this room, I wave dashed and dashed up to just barely get me to the wall and up this corridor. I wave dashed across this gap in the next room and found my way to another terrible room. I can get up to this ice block pretty easily, but the problem is down here. This gap is too big to dash across, so instead I did this. You might think this is advanced movement, but instead I line myself up on this wall to jump off this tiny edge here and finish the stage. It looks cool, but it's really not too hard. The level after that is the last stage in this level, and it's also the hardest. It requires some very precise wall jumps to get over these spikes, and then another few to get up here and onto this ledge. But with that, I paid my respects to the gravestone and took a quick nap at my campfire. Chapter 2 was a walk in the park, so let's step up the difficulty in the hotel. The first difficult room happened 5 minutes in. There's some easy climbing parkour here, and to bypass it, you might think you can do some simple neutral jumps. The problem is that I can't get over these spikes. I can dash over one of them, but not both. I tried for a while, but eventually I had to neutral jump and then dash just before I hit the spikes to just barely make it across the gap and onto this platform. Besides that, I cleared out all the junk pretty efficiently and without problems. It made timing a little harder in some spots as I couldn't cling to the wall and wait for the right moment, and instead just had to send it. But I made it through. I pressed forward collecting some keys and wound up all the way here. As much as I would love to neutral jump up this wall, the floating death balls don't give very comforting hugs, so I'm gonna have to pass. A simple dash also doesn't give enough height, so I'm gonna have to use another advanced trick called the wall bounce. By vertically dashing up and then jumping at the right moment, you get some extra height, distance, and momentum, and it lets us clear this very scary obstacle. There wasn't much else to talk about except for the fact that platforming just got a lot more difficult. It took me 43 minutes to beat this chapter, which is more than twice what it took to beat the first 2 chapters combined. The game is stepping up, and I don't know how much I can handle. Speaking of which, let's talk about Chapter 4. If Chapter 3 was about 4 times harder than Chapters 1 and 2, then Chapter 4 is about 40 times as hard. Chapter 4 introduces several new mechanics, and pretty much all of them are designed to screw this challenge up. The first is these directional blocks. While some of them are activated by standing on top, many are activated by grabbing onto the side. And several can only be controlled by grabbing onto the side, leaving me very little wiggle room on what else I can do. The second is wind. Sometimes wind can be good if it's pointing towards a wall, as I don't even need to neutral jump to get up it. But if the wind is facing away, I don't even have the ability to neutral jump, and only have the ability to cry. I hated wind in casual playthrough, but now it is so much worse. But before we get to those awful rooms, first I spent a couple minutes in this room. The left key is trivial to collect, but the right key wants you to dash into it and then climb up and jump over the spikes to escape. The passage is too narrow to neutral jump, so to escape I instead had to land a very precise jump, making sure not to go too low or too high. But now to get into the real stuff. In this room I can activate this floating block, but would need to grab the side to steer it to get up here. Instead I had to wave dash from this platform and dash upwards, just barely missing these spikes to proceed. If you're enjoying, then make sure to subscribe for weekly uploads just like this. Thank you. Then, after a pretty chill room, we're thrown right back into the fire. In here, we have 2 platforms we can't activate, so to get around this, I wall bounced 2 times and dashed over here. That's the easy part. But now I have to land a super precise neutral jump to get around this spike patch without dying. It took me about 6 minutes, but I got it. And if you thought 6 minutes on a jump was bad, just wait for this next room, because I spent 60 minutes on 1 jump in here. I can't use this block, so I instead had to go over here and jump all the way up here normally. And no, a wave dash doesn't cut it at all. It was always clear to me that I had to use this area up here, and I need to maintain a dash through it all, so to get in there I needed to wave dash. A normal one doesn't give quite enough height, so instead I had to basically cancel it midway to gain a little more height and lose some distance. This lets me just barely latch onto this ledge and neutral jump up. From there I can jump around and jump off this tiny ledge, and from there I was confused. I figured I could use another advanced trick called a corner kick, where you get just barely close enough to the corner to jump off of it. But when I dash, I'm either too high and give Madeline a concussion, or too low and miss the corner. I tried for way too long before giving up. Instead, I looked around in the settings and found the crouch dash in the controller configuration. If you hold down, dash, and then quickly correct the way you want to go, you can perform a crouch dash, which is effectively the same except Madeline's hitbox is smaller. So, by jumping off this edge, I can crouch dash, just barely missing this edge, and then uncrouch after the dash ends to corner kick and finish the room. Whew. With 2 terrible rooms out of the way, surely we will have an easy one, right? Well, the good news is there aren't any directional blocks, but the bad news is there's some intense wind. I can jump and dash to get up here before wave dashing to get over here. The problem is getting up to this ledge. Just using this bubble and dashing is just barely too short. So instead I had to make a seemingly pixel-perfect wave dash from this smidge of a platform to make it onto the other platform. In the next room I performed the same crouch dash and just barely missed this spike before corner kicking and getting into this bubble to finish the room. Pretty easy, and back into the torture. In this room I can get over to this bubble pretty easily, but then I have to get up here without neutral jumping because of the wind. So I had to push the wall bounce to its absolute limits to perform this crazy jump. After that, the rest of the room is easy. After passing through all of the wind stages, I get put right back in my place with some blocks I can't move. To skip through this section, I first had to get up on the first block and then neutral jump up the second. And thankfully, I unlocked a checkpoint after that, so we're pretty much good. The top section required some somewhat precise neutral jumps, but I got it after a few minutes of trying. But then we get to this room. Unfortunately, without moving the block, this room is 100% impossible. I tried for a while, but we're gonna have to move this block to get anywhere. And thankfully, there is an option. While you have the no grabbing mode on, if you try to grab a wall, you just slide down. But if you grab a motion block, you still slide down, but you also activate it. I've been trying not to use this as it feels like cheating, and I'll keep track to try and use it as little as possible, to keep the integrity of this challenge alive. After that unfortunate room, there's not much else to discuss. I did some funky wave dashes and cool snowball jumps, but there's nothing I need to go in depth on, so I finished Chapter 4 after nearly 3 hours. Chapter 5 only introduces one new mechanic, which is these platforms which activate when you dash, already making them infinitely better than the grabbing blocks in level 4. But while most of them are good and easy to use, they occasionally make rooms like this, which are living hell. To get over to the other side, I have to somehow get on the right side, which looks something like this. And thankfully I decided to copy this room and throw its demonic looking brother later in the level. I honestly got this pretty quickly, so I'm just going to show you the attempt that worked. I think I could have done the rest of the platforming normally, but I didn't really feel like going through all the trouble to collect these keys, and instead used a wonky looking wave dash to cross these tentacles and skip a lot of the level. After that, we find Theo stuck in a glass cage and have to grab him to pick him up. Now, technically, this is the same button they use for climbing, but if you're gonna say to my face that this is climbing, I don't even know what to say. I will die on this hill. I don't even feel like I need to explain why this is not climbing. Anyway, I infected this massive eye and headed into Reflection. The main gimmicks here are the golden feathers, which is amazing, and Kevin. You activate Kevins by dashing into them, which is normally fine, but they run into the same problem as the last stage, where sometimes you have to neutral jump on the side when you can't climb. Thankfully, I never really found anything too hard with them. There are also these blue balls, but you jump on them, so they're also amazing. There wasn't much in the way of major roadblocks, and the entire boss fight against Madeline was quite kind, so I got to hug her and level up. right before I tackled the summit. Chapter 7 starts off kind of terribly, as immediately I have to use the no grabbing mode to move this block to get by. It blocks us off very effectively, and I don't have any choice. There were some areas after that were difficult, but there wasn't anything new or anything really interesting to talk about, so let's just cut to the good room. This was the hardest trick of the entire run. The first part of this room is laughably easy, until we get here. First I jumped onto this platform and dashed over to this wall before neutral jumping up it. You need to jump off and crouch dash between these spikes and the platform, while also holding down to crouch so you don't stand into these spikes when your dash ends. From there, you need to also hold left so you don't careen into these spikes and then react as soon as you can to dash right and finish the trick. Even though it only took me like 5 or 6 inputs, it still took me an hour and a half to pull off. After that, I flew up to the final 30 checkpoints and started the final trek up to the summit. I had to neutral jump and wall bounce and do almost all of the precise tricks we've learned throughout the run, but pretty much every obstacle was a recreation of something we've seen before, so there's not much to go into detail about. I dashed and jumped and got all the way up Celeste Mountain without ever climbing once. If you enjoyed, then make sure to watch another video here and have a great day.